Hey, hey, it's starting.
Live. Liver than you'll ever be.
Live without a net. Starting. Yeah, here we are. Hey, how's it going, folks? Or
Live. Liver than you'll ever be.
or as we say here in New Zealand, how's it going, peeps?
Yeah, bro.
Cheer, bro. Hey, thanks for joining us. If we've got anyone, yeah, we've got 2 viewers. I'll put the chat on so I can see if anyone's going to be chatting to us. Hold on, buddy. How's your day been?
Oh, if I talk business, I'd bring the conversation down. So let's just keep it musical and lighthearted.
Have you got a nice cup of tea there?
Yeah, it's brown tea. Slightly.
Yeah, yeah. If anybody's watching from North America, it's the middle of our winter here, so it's a cold day in the Waikato.
Actually, there was some. I think there was some southerlies today, eh? Southwesters.
Yeah.
13 degrees.
Hey, we've got David Ennis. Hey, David, thank you for joining us. This is Carl and I. We're just doing a recap from the show that we did on Sunday. The initial idea was to talk about the Stones' first tour. So I don't know a lot about the Stones' first couple of tours. So that's why we've got Carl here, because he does.
I know a little bit. Yeah.
Take it away, brother.
Oh, hey, well, just as you know, the Stones held the premier spot at the Marquee, and obviously having the premier spot at the Marquee, they built up quite a following, packed house, consistent, and obviously with signing with Decca Records and got a few singles out. Obviously, the next thing is to tour. Let's get these guys out on the road. And as Ben was mentioning, Canuck, is that right? Canuck?
Canucks.
Canuck.
The Canuck.
As Canuck was mentioning, in order to maximise the tour, because obviously everything was on a budget, they'd have, 6 or 8 acts with doing 20-minute sets. So if you think about it, it was probably pretty competitive. You know, every act is out there to basically wow the crowd and maximise their time and get exposure. And obviously, as we know, the Stones were something else. And that's when I think they learned how to not necessarily manipulate the crowd, but really move the crowd. And that's when people like Mick Jagger would have really honed their showmanship skills. Because, you know, small stage, no PAs, only 20 minutes. Those guys had to get real good quick. And they got good quick because they toured a lot. And obviously they toured a lot because they became popular because they were good. And we see Brian Jones bring out the tambourine and the harp, and Mick, you know, starting to get his little James Brown thing going when you watch those early tours. And it was mainly just R&B and blues covers, really. They didn't really have any of their own songs. So, yeah, all about energy in those days.
I'm looking through, you know, some photographs of that '63 tour at the moment, and it's interesting that the gear that they were using, obviously they were using Vox amps, AC30s. Keith had a harmony; he was playing a harmony, and Bill was using a Framus bass.
What a hideous bass, eh?
All relatively, I don't want to say cheap, but entry level. Could we say entry level gear, or was that just the gear that was available then?
I mean, let's face it, they were slummed up in that Edith Grove, 3 of them in a small unit. Bill, I think, had a job. Charlie had a bit of a paying gig. He probably had a Gretsch, maybe. But I would say that their gear was purely relied on their budget. But the simple fact was, you are probably right, it would have still been pretty good would, but just not the Fenders and the Gibsons as we know. But I mean, we listen to those first singles and a big portion of that first album, they still got a good sound out of that gear. A really good sound.
And remarkably different from the Beatles. And we're always going to, I suppose, unconsciously and draw that out in our conversation through the shows, make those comparisons with the Beatles. But when you consider they were using AC30s,
yes,
the sound, the tones that they were getting were obviously remarkably different.
And I think, in fairness, the AC30, and obviously the less wattage, the smaller the amp, the cheaper it's going to cost, but it's actually a blessing in disguise because they got a beautiful overdriven sound. And that was just basically because they were maximizing the volume. They wanted to be loud. Small amps, when they're overdriven, create a bit of a distortion. So,
well, that's right, because both Brian and Keith were using the AC30 with the top boost circuit, which so we all know if we've played reissues of the Vox amps what that top boost can do.
Okay. And I'm thinking you would have read that story about when they first really got down on Brian, when he was the band's not only musician and founder but also de facto accountant. He would pay the band, and then they realized after about a year
he was taking $5 more or £5 more.
So that maybe coincides with the fact that he got a nice shiny white Gretsch about 3 months into the tour, which wouldn't have been a cheap guitar in those days. So interesting. The gear they used is totally different to the gear they use now. You know, harmonies, Gretches, even Gibson Les Pauls. I mean, obviously the Vox Teardrop, which unfortunately Brian, but that initial gear actually gave them that really rootsy sound though that we love.
Well, that's can you see that photo there? That's the Gretsch that you're talking about.
Wow.
The harmony, and you can also see the framers. So that's a good point. That's a good point that you make about the Gretsch. Yeah, that would have been considerably more than what the other guys were using.
Well, I mean, we've seen the Gretsch at down at the Rock Shop. What's that? Is it a real McCoy or is that a copy? Did they have a real McCoy down there? It was like $3,000 or $2,500 or.
Oh, look, I think they start in New Zealand dollars from $1,200 up to $5,000 for the the White Falcon, which is probably about $6,000 New Zealand.
Wow, unbelievable! So if we convert $6,000 into a weekly wage, 800, 6, 8s, 8.5s, we're talking a lot of time to save up for something like that. So inflation back in those days at Gretsch, that would have been, like you say, a considerable amount of money put down on a guitar. So, and especially England, I mean, obviously everything was imported, but I think Brian liked that. Excuse me, that Gretsch, especially with the slide playing. I'm pretty sure there's some footage of him playing slide with that Gretsch on some of those early TV shows. So yeah. Those interesting instrument choices back in those days.
And it wasn't long after that Keith ditched that harmony.
Yes.
For a casino.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
which would have made sense because guess what? He's a big Chuck Berry fan. Holes. If he wanted to be, the son of Chuck Berry, he would have had to, obviously sound a bit like him. And the beauty about those casinos is obviously you can get a lot of different sounds out of them. Besides the Chuck Berry, you can get, your rock and a bit of twang. So it would have been perfect choice for him.
I think, yeah. Well, clearly, the benefit with having the casino is that it's got a real mid-range punch on those P90s,
Yep.
and you know, we talked about this on the first show. You know, the Beatles got their casinos in 65, 66. Keith had his 2 years. 2 years, maybe 3 years before the Beatles. So that's another first for the Rolling Stones.
Yeah. Well, it's just looking back. I mean, that's why I love the pictures and the album covers, because you learn a lot. You see, you know, you look at the gear that they'd favoured at that time, and then obviously we've seen that famous shot of Keith with his denim jacket after he'd been to America. He brought back a Les Paul. So obviously, you know, and comparing guitars to cars, a Les Paul would have been probably, you know, a little BMW or a Mercedes, you know, higher end. But I actually really enjoyed that primitive sound that they had on those albums, and obviously that sound that they honed from the tours. And it just goes to show you don't need a whole lot of money to get a good sound. You know, just a whole lot of passion and just making sure the guitar's tuned, and obviously a little bit of practice.
Well, that's the appeal for me about that whole British blues scene. You know, we've touched on it before. You know, Fleetwood Mac. All Peter Green did was just plug his 59 into an amp. All Clapton was doing when he was playing, well, that they had a Ranger. Like a basic overdrive, though, didn't he? There's debates about whether he did or he didn't. But basically, you know, that first album that he did with John Mayall, you could argue that it's just his Les Paul into a Marshall, and the same thing with the Stones. They were just plugging their guitars straight into amps and playing pure music.
Yes, and really, they could do no other, because the music they were emulating, which is obviously blues and some of the R&B, was actually the same sort of thing. It was very minimalist. It was just some guys plugging a guitar into an amp. I mean, obviously guys like Ike Turner and some of these bigger guys with their Fender amps could get that tremolo and reverb happening, which obviously they couldn't do at that time. But they got that a bit later on with a bit more money once they got the Fender amps. I mean, did the Vox AC30 have any reverb or tremolo? Had a bit of gain, didn't it?
Well, it had the top boost on them as well. You know, that's a very good point, because my reissue, my AC15 that I had, and the AC30s that I see in the music stalls, yep, have a reverb and a tremolo. So, gee, that's some homework. I could, if you want to carry on talking, I could probably answer that question now.
Yeah,
that's a good point. I don't know if those early Voxes had those circuits.
Yeah, because obviously with their limited budget and being on the scene not for a very short time, they had to just utilize what they had. But obviously going to America and bringing some gear back, they could get not necessarily a bit more creative, but they could at least round out their sound a bit more, cover a wider area. Because a lot of those southern guys were definitely using tremolo and reverb, and yeah, so. But yeah, the evolution of the Stones with their gear, it's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. But I'm pretty sure that they pretty much stuck to Fender amps after the first or the second American tour. That pretty much was their mainstay in the studio and on the live gigs. Which is a shame, because I do like the Voxes.
Oh, look, I've had a Vox, and look, yeah, good amp, but you know, I've got a Vibrolux Reverb at the moment, and the difference between the two amps, chalk and cheese.
So I'm going to assume that because I've seen that amp and I've played it, and it is a work of art. The Fender just hands down.
Oh, absolutely, hands down.
Because let's face it, I mean, we love Strats, we love Tallies, but one thing that Fender does exceptionally well is amps. I mean, when we talked about Peter Green, I mean, him and Danny loved those twin reverbs. What are they? 100 watts?
Yeah.
Two 12-inch speakers.
So we've got a couple of guys in the chat here saying g'day to us. We've got Michael B and Johnny Bean, our granddad. That I mean that respectfully too, Johnny. You know, because it's like I said to you, it's your show that's given us the cracker for us to get our show going. So once again, thanks, Johnny.
Awesome.
Yeah, look, getting back to amps, a Vibrolux Reverb. The Stones would have gone through the same process that I went through. You know, I'm very happy to play their AC30s, just a different amp. And when they got to the States, they probably had the opportunity straight away to play the gear that a lot of their idols were playing.
Yep.
And I don't think they played Voxes ever since.
No. And if you think about it, the more popular they got, the bigger the crowds they played to, the bigger the theatres. They would have had to have gear that would match their surroundings. And Fender has quite a quiver, doesn't it? Quite a fleet. So, you know, ain't nothing to jump from 25 to 60 watt to 100.
Absolutely.
Fender had the range. So that Tammy shows late November 64, which would have been probably the second tour. And they come out with, you know, Keith's got the Gibson and Brian's got the Vox, and they've got those two Fender amps with the head units matching just beautiful sound. So that would have been the sound that ultimately would have been aiming for, you know, like a sound I love. I mean, a lot of my heroes play Fender amps. I mean, I love Marshall, I love Vox, but I think Fender takes it, you know. My personal opinion.
I bought this pedal a couple of years ago.
Yep.
This pedal here, it's a Catlin bred pedal, and the circuit in this pedal, it's based on the Ampegs that the Stones were using in the late 60s. The SVTs, the single.
So those Ampegs would have been their 60,000, 80,000 concert shows. Big stack of wall stack of sound.
Yeah. And that's what this pedal is based on, that circuit. And I haven't had the opportunity to play Ampegs, even though there's a couple of amps at the local music store, but I suspect they're nothing like what they were playing in the late 60s. But why did they go from Fenders to Ampeg? Was it because of a deal? You know, was it a business deal that they had, or was it?
Possibly, I don't know. Possibly, but like Fleetwood Mac with Orange, maybe. I mean, a Fender known as obviously you have, you know, your Marshall stacks, and you've got your, as we know, the Orange and the Ampeg stacks. Did Fender do stacks with, you know, Madison Square Garden and live at the Coliseum? And, you know, I've never really heard of Fenders doing stacks.
No.
So it's probably just out of necessity to you know, I mean, you're filling big rooms, Royal Albert Hall. I mean, obviously you can mic the small amps, but I mean, I think they just wanted the power and the fact that there was backup there if they needed it. Because that Guilla's out to pretty amazing sound, and that's coming from a stack, right?
Oh, absolutely. We're
not talking about a cream stack or a Hendrix stack or a Pantera stack, but at least half a stack of pancakes. Not a full stack.
So when you were playing regularly in the bands that you were part of,
yep.
I recall you had a quad, didn't you? A Reverb.
Was a Super Reverb?
Yeah.
I never really. It was a shame because it was a beautiful amp, but I never really got to play it to its potential because I left for America. But just a beautiful amp. But looking back, I think it was too powerful for what I was doing because that's 14-inch speakers, eh?
Boy, that would have been loud.
Yeah. And I see the problem is that really nice, subtle overdrive sound that the Stones had, the sound that I love. In order to get that overdriven sound, the volume's got to be about 7, which is unbearable. So like you said, when you go to a club, you only need a 30, 40 watt amp if you want to mic it properly.
Oh, well, when I get together and play, I take my Vibrolux and very rarely is it past 5, very rarely. And that's one of the great things about having a pedal board. You know, you can take an overdrive pedal and you're not blowing everyone's eardrums out.
Right.
Because you turn this amp up to 8, man. Yeah.
Yeah. No, well, you don't want to, especially if you're playing a telly, which is quite bright and cutting. You imagine just how intense that would be. So I guess that's why, I don't want to get off too much off topic, but like guys like Steve Ray Vaughan would have 2 amps, something to get the top range, another amp to get the mids and the bottoms. But yeah, no, that's Ampex. So 72 tour, obviously the 69. Do they continue with the Ampex?
Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah.
And then you have a look at what they're playing now. Have a look at what
is the boogies now?
No, Keith's using the Tweeds Fender.
Oh wow.
He's using those Fender not the Bassman.
Oh wow. So they for their live shows, are they just miking up those Fender amps now?
Yeah.
Okay. It's all wireless and technology is probably amazing.
So Mick's using here we go. Keith's Fender Brown and Tweed high-powered twin amps. He's using twins.
Oh wow.
I'll show you. So that's Keith's current setup. Those there, that's Ronnie's setup.
Yep. Are they?
And if you have a look, there, that's Mick's.
Wow, what an endorsement, eh? What an endorsement.
So Mick's got a stack.
Wow. Yeah. And have the Stones ever used Marshall amps? I can't recall. Maybe Mick Taylor?
Well, that's a big book for me to go through. You're giving me all this homework, man.
Yeah. Surely Mick Taylor would have used Marshall amps in the John Mayall's Blues Breakers, but it'd be interesting to see what he carried on over into the Stones, because definitely loved his Gibsons and SGs.
Yeah, I can't recall. Let's have a look in the quick index. But no, I agree with you. That first tour, they got a great tone. They got obviously lots of energy, transcended from what they were doing live to the recordings, because you sit back and listen to some of those early records, it's just like,
yeah.
wow.
Well, that's like I said before, Hound Dog Taylor did the same thing. He had a cheap Japanese guitar. He had an old amp, and they had holes in the speakers, and it got a great nasty sound, which he's synonymous with. So sometimes out of just out of desperation is the best sound.
Is it true that guitar that he played, was that a plastic guitar?
Hound Dog or Keith?
Hound Dogs.
Oh, all I know was just a cheap Japanese guitar.
Yeah, I think they were plastic or something, or they had plastic components to them.
Yeah, and they're famous now because obviously he's known as the guy, and JB Hutto even had a cheap guitar too. And these guys were a slide guitar supreme.
Well, to answer your question about did the Stones play Marshalls, I'm looking at the index of the Stones gear book, and there is no entry for Marshall.
Wow. So I guess they pulled Mick Taylor over, and after when he joined the band, says, "Hey, you can leave the Marshall at the door with Fender people and Peg people."
Oh well, Keith ran the show, didn't he?
And what I like about Fender is obviously it's a beautiful rock blues sound, but it also caters to jazz. So Mick Taylor would have been on board with that Fender sound. So was Ampeg American? English?
Yeah.
Okay.
American.
And are they still current to this day? Are they still got a presence?
Yeah, they're still made, but they're by some other company, that has about 5 or 6 other different brands.
Yeah.
They at the local rock shop, there's about 3 or 4 different models, but they're marketed as bass amps. I haven't seen any. There's a guy I know that used to come into work that had one of their combos, and it was a 1973 or something like that, but it cost him a fortune, and he got it fixed up by one of the local techs, but he thought it didn't sound as good as it did before it got fixed.
No.
Which is I suppose that's a risk that you take, though, don't you?
Yeah, no, it's as much as I love the Stones and the music, I'm also equally in love with the gear, And you and I being guitar players, and it's fascinating and I don't want to copy their sound at all, but I love the fact that they tried different things, and even went through a Mesa Boogie phase. Hey?
Yes, through the 70s there.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep. And going back and forth with Fender and Gibson, and Gibson and Fender, and Fender and Gibson, and then, it's just an incredible journey.
Well, let's face it, you're not going to go wrong with any of that gear, are you?
Nah, not at all. So just 63 tour was, which they would have used all that gear on their first album, and then obviously, conquering Britain at least and getting a national exposure, they said, well, the next thing is let's go to America. And can you imagine going to the rock shops in Los Angeles and Chicago and New York? Could have been like a mini supermarket. They would have been aghast.
Absolutely.
A little bit of pockets.
Absolutely.
Pocket.
They would have been like kids in a lolly shop.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. They. I wonder if they still kept some of those old guitars. Wouldn't that be just like something you'd put in the Hard Rock Museum? It would be amazing. An old.
Keith has on that documentary, that Netflix documentary. He's got 3,000 guitars.
He owns 3,000 guitars.
Is that correct or not? Or
I don't have a clue. I know that he owns a lot. That's amazing. Well,
or is it the Stones together has three? I don't know why I'm thinking 3,000.
Unbelievable. Well, because they pick out when they're doing their little blues jams and that, they pick out their little ES 355s and ES 175s. They've got quite an artillery, don't they? So they get a bit clever and pull out some of these big old Gibson guns from time to time. So yeah.
What was interesting is that when he was recording his latest solo album, I'll have to go through and watch that documentary again, Carl. His tech pulled out this parlor guitar, Gibson Parlor, an LP something 001 or whatever, and it was around the same year, 1934 or something. Just about priceless, this guitar. That had been buried in the back of wherever Keith stores his guitars. And
was it acoustic?
Yeah, an acoustic. Yeah, and the techs, you know, that's part of his job is to circulate or go through the guitars to check them. But he found this guitar and thought, oh, and gave it to Keith and said, here, you should play that. And so Keith recorded a couple of songs on that album,
yeah,
using that guitar. But yeah, I'll check that out and I'll get back to you on the next show with the figure. But it's a staggering amount.
Yeah. Well, I can imagine. I mean, obviously, they're still kids in a candy store. I mean, I've heard Keith and them talk about how they still listen to Chuck Berry like they listened to it the first time ever. They're just still amazed. So that would coincide with gear as well, you know. They would still be like little kids, you know, if they bought a new guitar, they'd be like, look at this. So,
well, Johnny Bean's just saying, great show, great chat, guys. Got a split. It's 12:41 a.m. over there, so that's late. Have a long day tomorrow. Keep it up. So I'm just going to reply, cheers, Johnny. Thanks for the kind words, because that's motivating, isn't it?
Yeah, in England or America?
Johnny's I think he's in California, but yeah, in the States.
Wow.
Yeah, Johnny's amazing. Yeah, I'm a fan of his shows. I've been watching him and his channel since 2012 when Van Halen's album came out with David Lee Roth.
Yeah.
And you know, I was going through this Van Halen stage, and I bought this PV guitar and I bought this PV amp. And I was searching on the internet for settings and lessons and stuff like that, and I came across Johnny's channel, and he's got a couple of interesting videos there talking about how to get different tones and techniques. So he was probably one of the first guys to do it. And it's a guerrilla style back then. There's a lot of shots with him without his head, but getting the detail of what he's talking about across, which is pretty good. Now he's got a show, I think, Carl, they do twice a week. It used to be three times a week.
Yeah, and
it's really popular. It's geared mainly for Van Halen nuts. Obviously, I am one. And then guitar nuts, and I've met a lot of guys, and it's restored my faith in social media, because I would jump on Facebook or YouTube, and you and I have spoken about this personally, and you'd go to a channel and somebody would just write all this rubbish and crap, you know, everybody knows everything, why are you doing this?
Yeah,
and I suppose it's going to happen on our channel sooner or later. At the moment, we've got a lot of positive comments, and I don't mind thumbs down. If people want to give us a thumbs down, that's fine.
Yeah.
But we're going to probably get some negative comments. But one thing that I liked about hanging out with Johnny and his crew and his audience is the support that you get from guys around the world. It's amazing. So it just restored my faith back in social media.
Yeah, I mean, there's people out there, kindred spirits like you and I, and other people that actually not necessarily get it, but we all share the same love. And then you have a tendency to weed out the crap. We can always hit the block button, or but we agree to disagree. I mean, some things I'll say I might be wrong. I mean, might have the wrong ear or the wrong amp, but at the end of the day, we're all coming from the right place, which is just sharing what we care about. And more the merrier.
Well, yeah, we are going to get it wrong. We are going to get some things wrong. And if you want to have a go at somebody and call them a name because they got something wrong, well, that's not cool. But you can always drop a comment and say, hey, Andrew, Danny Kerwin was 18 years old when he joined Fleetwood Mac, not 17. Oh, okay, all right, well, yeah, sorry. Yeah.
By the way, did you know his birthday and his date? Because I'll remember that too for next time.
What was that? Sorry, buddy.
And you can just tap on, just say thank you for that. And do you actually know his birthday and date? Because I'll write that in my calendar.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't correct somebody, because I suppose that's why we're here in the first place, is to share our ideas, like you were saying before, to share our ideas and to share our experiences about the music that we like.
Yeah.
But I just don't dig people saying.
And I agree with people saying, actual matter of fact, Muddy Waters did not write that song. That was the Howling Wolf song. Actually, that's great, because I'm a big believer in giving credit where credit's due. So constructive criticism is welcome. Not necessarily constructive criticism, but just hey, you guys, just a heads up. It was actually Little Walter that played harp on that, not Shaky Horton, or Mick was backup on that song, and he overdubbed his vocals, and it's actually Keith doing the main, whatever. So yeah.
Yeah, well, and that still blows me away, because I get corrected all the time. I think you told me something the last show we did about a song that Brian sang.
Oh, well, on the first album, as we know, actually, a couple songs, even onto the second. So was it Walking the Dog and Tell Me You're Coming Back to Me? Yeah, he did backup vocals.
And, well, yeah. So I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And I would have thought that him and Keith would have been doing backup vocals though anyway. But sometimes you have to be pointed out. Well, actually, no, he only sang on a couple of songs.
I don't know why they. I don't think he was too bad. I don't know why they gave him a couple, and then I guess when Mick and Keith became regular, consistent songwriters, it just was only natural for Keith to play backup on a song he wrote. Yeah.
Oh, there's a lot of theories there too. There's a lot of theories. Some people have said that he became difficult to work with too. He wasn't open to other people's suggestions in the band. So.
Keith.
Brian.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So there's a lot of theories out there. But we got him to thank though for starting the band and putting it on its trajectory, which is what we're all here for. Blues music, British blues.
Yeah. No, it's definitely 60. So they did their first demos in 62, 63 they did their first singles and first major national tour. Then 64, I think February, the album came out, which was so it would have made sense then. That's actually what happened. Their first American tour would have been just a little bit after their first album, because guess what the title of the American cover was? England's newest hitmakers. See, what was amazing about the Stones' first album was untitled. David Bailey photograph. It was unheard of, with a moody backdrop.
That's right.
And then Americans go and, caffeinate it up with big headline,
So who do we thank that? Andrew Loog Oldham? Do we have him to thank for that first cover?
I think so. Yeah, creating this not a dark image, but just a moody, brooding image.
Summed up the band pretty well.
Yeah, because the first Beatles albums had that kind of moody image as well, with the Beatles for Sale and what's the first few albums? They had obviously. Well, the first one was pretty chirpy with looking down.
Well, they were influenced by French cinema and Italian cinema at that time, weren't they? Which was all about that moody, dark, black and white.
Yeah.
That was what the art students were into. So, they certainly tapped into a correct artistic vein, didn't they? They did really well then.
Yeah, and they're to this day, those album covers are works of art, and so that would have made sense in that first American tour, which would have been, obviously they love England, that's their home country, but the first American tour was their first probably taste of, listen guys, we're making it, we're about to make it, we're on the verge, and thousands and thousands and thousands of gigs later.
So what guitar did you particularly enjoy playing when you were gigging regularly in your bands? What did you have a favorite, or did you rotate?
I only had the one guitar, and because we didn't have a bass player, I had to basically take all the tone off and kind of use a rhythm guitar bass sound. So I got that through my Gibson Les Paul. What's the one with the mini pickups? It was a deluxe, was it? Or yeah. So, but looking back, I wished I actually had a Tele, to be honest. But it would have been too bright because the guy I played in the band with had a couple of Fenders. It would have been just so bright. So it probably worked out well. But looking all the way back, if I could do it all over again, I would have a Tele in either a Casino or a 335. The Les Pauls are great, but they are heavy. And I think a lot of those bands, I think a lot of those guys kind of picked up on that, because SG would have been a bit lighter, eh?
Yes, considerably.
So Mick Taylor obviously loved that. Obviously the Vox would have been super light. Brian would have loved that with the single pickups. And the 335s and the Casinos are hollow, so they're pretty light, eh?
Yes, considerably. Yeah, they're good.
So, yeah, looking back, what I'll do next time, I'll get my book out as well and go through some pictures and just see what gear they use. So with the first and the second American tours, obviously the Vox, Brian, and the Keith went guitars, didn't he?
What was that? Sorry,
Keith played quite a few different guitars. Was it mainly the Paul?
In the first British tour,
first American tours, 64 and 64.
Well, the main X that he used was his Casino.
Wow. Okay. And there's a very rare shot, and it must have been, who knows, but he's playing a Stratocaster.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's actually another famous story, and you would have heard of this, that Linda Keith and Six Stratocaster in Keith Richards' hotel room and says, "Hey Jimmy, you're the next best thing." Oh, it's Kevin.
Do you want to just talk for a couple of seconds while I take this call, buddy? Is that okay? You can just talk to there's 3 people watching. So, do you want to do that?
Yeah. Wow, here alone. So lost my train of thought. Used to talk to somebody. Feels weird talking to yourself. I'll just wait till Andrew gets back.
That's one of the perils of live YouTubing, folks. Stealing Keith's Stratocaster to give to Jimmy. Wow.
And then the story goes even further. That when they played Red House, the Noel Redding, who was playing bass, took all the tone off and used that Strat for the bass line.
That's right. I have heard that.
Yeah.
And it blows me away.
So yeah, I think did Keith ever get it back? Because I know he lost Linda Keith.
Well, talking about Gibson. So I've shown this before. This is a copy of a Les Paul, obviously.
Yeah.
And this is the third copy of a Les Paul that I've had. And the first one that I had, I got rid of it because of the weight factor, Carl.
Yeah.
At that time, when I was playing, I was standing, and I had a crook back at that time, so it just didn't work.
Yes.
That's when I went to a Telecaster because of the weight.
Wow.
But because I'm a tone chaser now, this works well. Just if I'm just doing some jamming. But one thing though that I do notice about playing a Les Paul type of guitar, I play the neck pickup for my leads.
Okay. Which is the neck? Is that top or bottom?
That pickup, the neck one.
Oh, okay. Which on your toggle, whereabouts is that? Right up.
Yeah.
That makes sense. That makes sense because, I mean, guys like Slash will use the bridge pickup for their crunchy rhythms and then the neck for their thick mid-range solos.
Well, because I'm inspired by the British blues scene, I just think this replicates a lot of the tones that I'm hearing in my ears.
In order for them to get that country tone or southern tone, would they use the middle toggle or the bridge, where it's a lot brighter?
Bridge has to be the bridge. If someone's getting a country tone by using them together, wow, they must have a super clean, loud amp, because I don't know how they can. Look, I love guitars. Clearly, you and I, we love guitars. I love the Les Paul. Some of the greatest recordings I've ever heard have been played with Les Paul. But you're right, and we've said it before. They're heavy guitars, man.
Yeah. It's a hunk of wood. It is a hunk of wood. But we can't have when we think of Les Pauls, we think of the school of John Mayall, the Erics, the Peter Greens, the Mick Taylors. And then, I'm a big Slash fan, as you know, and I think Slash channels a lot of that British blues, let's face it.
Oh, and he said so himself in his book. He said he tried to play a Strat through his Marshalls, and it just wasn't him. He just would
have been too bright and too rubbery.
I can't remember how he described it, but he just said it wasn't him. It just didn't work. And in fact, there's a DVD where they're talking about Jimi Hendrix too, and they're interviewing guys, and he's on the air saying that too, that it didn't work for him. Clearly, it worked for Jimi Hendrix. but yeah, it didn't work for Slash.
Wow. Yeah. Well, there's that famous video of Jimi Hendrix in Sweden, Stockholm, and it was a really awesome footage, but he's having a lot of trouble with his white Gibson SG, like with the tone controls. And he's still got a nice sound, but it just wasn't Jimmy, eh? I mean, I wanted Jimmy to love Gibsons, but Fender was his thing.
Hey, talking about Guns N' Roses, don't forget this month they're reissuing Appetite for Destruction, and they're re-releasing about 15 songs and demos that they did. So that's really? yeah. That's an event.
15 alternative tracks that were on the album, or 15 totally different songs?
See, I can't remember what I read, but there is. I'll just have a look on Spotify now. While we're talking about that, because that was something I wanted to talk to you off air, but we're talking about Slash, so it's that album. I'll never forget, man, that album when it came out. My gosh.
So we're talking 87.
1987.
So 2017, 30 years ago? No. What's my math like? 20 years ago, 21 years ago.
So there's the Welcome to the Jungle 86 Sound City session. That's on. Can you see that?
Yep.
That's on Spotify now. But yeah, they're releasing that like within days.
Cool. Well, we can all bring it all back. We've talked about this before. I mean, it was a bit like the Stones when they were starting out, Guns N' Roses, and we won't get too far off topic, but Slash used a Les Paul copy on that first album, because once again he was emulating or trying to emulate Joe Perry from Aerosmith, and obviously Kiss and a bit of punk rock, and obviously the Stones. They didn't have any money for a $3,000 Les Paul. Till
it was just was a cheap. It wasn't a $5,000 Les Paul. It was a $1,000 Les Paul copy.
That still managed to get an amazing sound of that first album, and just the tone on My Michelle, and just amazing. But once again, and this is a good point, I'm glad that we brought up Guns N' Roses. You can have oodles of passion and a good amount of talent and a lot of love for what you're doing, and no budget, and still make something magical happen. You can be a silver spoon and get golden handshakes and have $100,000 setup in a $500,000 studio, and nothing comes out. You know, so
well, that's correct. So he was using a $1,000 Les Paul copy, and the Marshall rig that he was using was a rig that was borrowed from a musical hire company, and
he had a meter run.
And then he realized how great that amp was.
Yeah.
After he listened to the recording, and went back to try and steal that amp, but they'd hired it to somebody else, and he never got that chance to get that amp back.
Well, but and the other problem was, if he tried to steal it, because he would have signed up with the leasing company with his driver's license, they would have matched the plates to his car. He would have got found out pretty quick.
Yeah. I always love that story, because it's it's so rock and roll. A cheap guitar, a hired rig, and he goes in and cuts a great album. When that album first came out, I remember looking at it and seeing the picture of them around the pump, and they're all wearing aviator sunglasses, and their hair's all messy. This is the first thing I thought of when I saw that.
Oh, they totally got their look from them.
So that's Keith in '73 in Scandinavia. So what's that look there? That's you compare that to Appetite for Destruction, you're looking at some twins there, aren't you?
Well, you've seen that picture of Stephen Adler copying that Keith Richards pose. Patience, please. The Drug America comes first with the Coke on his shirt and silver aviators. You've seen that, haven't you?
Absolutely.
Total rip-off.
Keep America drug-free.
So that was I mean, let's face it. I mean, and getting back to the Stones and the touring and their Mick honing his live act and putting, and to a lesser extent, what's his name? Tyler, what's the Aerosmith singer?
Steven Tyler.
Yeah. The 501s and the cowboy boots and wrapping scarves around the microphone, and the Stones started all that. Let's face it. The shiny rhinestone shirts and the boots and just rock and roll, eh?
Absolutely, my friend. Absolutely.
And today they're still doing it. So yeah.
Hey, it's been good chatting with you. Always look forward to catching up with you. So we're on schedule, you and I, to run Sunday's show if
Yep.
that's all good with you. I'm free. I'm looking forward to it.
Yep. No, we'll definitely pencil it in. Yeah, it's just it's a wonderful journey because here we are talking about the Stones and rounding it off with different bands and all these guys being on a budget and making these amazing sounds. So there's hope for us all.
Any homework that you want us to do? Is there anything that we're going to do in preparation for Sunday?
I think maybe we've already talked about the first album, haven't we? Yeah. Maybe we could go, and we've talked about obviously their blues influence. Maybe we could delve a bit deeper into their soul and R&B influence, because they got into that a bit more in their second and third albums. So the simple fact that they went to the Apollo Theatre and saw Smokey Robinson, and they covered a Sam Cooke song, and they got into Marvin Gaye with the song Hitchhike, and they got into Solomon Burke, and just the Stones just casting.
And who was the guy that went before them? James Brown at the Tammy Show. So they saw it firsthand.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And let's not forget their biggest breakout song before the last time was "It's All Over Now" by Bobby Womack. So, and they gave that a bit of a country twang. So the Stones just got better and better and better, didn't they?
Well, they absorbed the influences that were around them, and then delivered something that clearly was influenced by what they were hearing. Yeah, awesome.
And everybody wins because we all got to listen to this great music vicariously through Mick and Keith, through the people they influenced, and these black guys finally got their payday through the royalties.
Yeah. You and I have spoken about that many times, and that's going to be a constant theme as we develop this program, because we've said this before. One of the reasons why we admire Keith and Clapton, for that matter, besides their music, it's because they clearly said right from the word go who they were inspired by, and it was because of that these guys managed to get a living.
Absolutely.
Admirable.
Big time. And we talked about this with the '69 tour. All of a sudden, B.B. King's doing these large American tours, opening up, and Ike and Tina, and Tina does a version of Honky Tonk Woman on her album, I think. And just, I mean, can you imagine being these young kids, in America's like this land of the milk and honey and the bright lights, and your heroes are doing your songs, and they're like, "Who the hell are we? We were doing your songs. Now you pat us back by doing our songs."
Oh, well, that's right. So Ike goes into the changing room and goes up to Keith and says to Keith, "Hey, man, show me this G shit that you're doing." So he shows him, open G tuning. And then I think they go, the next album's all in open G.
Oh, wow. Yep. So just goes to show you that what's the Bible say? A servant is not greater than the master, a master is not greater than the servant.
Absolutely.
We'll all be exalted and we'll be humbled. Doesn't matter who you are. It's just as long as it's almost like, give respect where respect's due.
And on that note, my friend, I think we should end our show.
Awesome. Love it. Sunday.
Okay. Don't run away. I'll just end the feed.
Cool.
Hey, thanks, people in the chat too, for throwing a few comments to us, and thanks for watching us live. And anybody who's watching the rerun, thanks, Carl and I appreciate it. Carl and I are just sharing our passion for music, so thanks a lot.